Welcome back to part 2. Hopefully you got to see part 1. Even if you didn't see part 1 or even the previous one when we went through a lot of the high interest areas, I'm still going to be giving you some examples of prevention, intervention, and postvention strategies. They're different examples than what you saw in the previous 2, but hopefully that'll make the connections for you on how to, what to do after the meltdown. When we look at some of the things with what to do after the meltdown, here's our agenda. Once again, I don't have any times on this agenda. It is just a sequence. It is similar to an agenda that I would do for a student with an autism spectrum disorder because obviously we don't want them adhering to those times. 1 minute over, 1 minute before, we might see some anxiety. For those of you who participated in part 1 of this webcast, we did see Eloise have her meltdown. I'm going to re-show it for those who have not seen it. But the nice thing about this webcast is you're now going to see the instructional consequences. You're going to see what happened after the meltdown. We didn't show that in the first one because your job at that point was to come up with the instructional consequences. We still will be doing that. We're still going to go over some of the prevention, intervention, and postvention strategies, some new ones, some that you have not seen previously. And then we're going to look at Eloise at the very end to see as she's escorted out of the classroom by the special education teacher, calming down, and then finally the instructional consequences and her re-entry into the classroom as well. Just as a reminder how important that visual processing is, it is a strength, definitely, and in fact, that visual static, auditory is transient. That is why, as much as possible, if you can turn that verbal into a visual, lo and behold, it will support that student. As you're going through your schedule, point to the schedule. As you're going through giving oral directions for a paper or for a math sheet, make sure you refer to those visual directions. You know, it might be putting it, highlighting it, starring it in some way because that visual static, while that auditory is transient. And we all need our visual supports at times, maybe even this morning. One of the most effective things I've ever seen was done by a parent who explained to her son that he is not damaged, that his brain is not damaged, that there's not anything wrong with him. And she made the comparison, the difference between a Mac and a PC. I love my Mac. I'm working on a PC right now and having a really hard time with this PC, but that's because they have different processors and they're a little bit different in the way that that you work with them. But that doesn't mean that one is right and the other one is wrong, or that one is damaged and the other one is undamaged. So I really particularly liked this analogy that this mother gave her son. And I always urge parents to tell their child, what is it called? What do we call this? You know, it's called Asperger's or high-functioning autism or PDD-NOS, whatever. But to let him know what it's called, as well as to let him know that he has a brain that's wired differently. Bottom line, as this clip says, my ways of being are not merely damaged versions of yours. I'm not damaged. I think differently. Instead of trying to fix me, understand me. Teach me in the way that I learn. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to first share with you the video clip of Eloise. For those of you who saw this earlier, you might see some new things in it. But as you watch the video clip, be thinking of what would I do if I was the teacher who was escorting her out. As a background, at this time, Eloise was in 2nd grade. She was in a general education 2nd grade classroom. 2 days a week, she went to a gifted and talented program for half a day. The GT teacher was only there 2 days a week, half a day. During that time, for about 2 or 3 years, I had trained everybody on campus on how to use all the strategies we've been talking about in these webcasts. When it came time for the Bureau of Education and Research to come to video the demonstrations, of what it looks like in the classroom. And I approached the GT teacher. I asked her, what strategies are you going to be using with Eloise while she's in your classroom? And her response was, she doesn't need any of those things in here. We have a very structured classroom, and she doesn't need anything. She's never had any problems in here before. And of course, a part of me was having a heart attack, thinking, oh my gosh, what if we have a problem? Well, sure enough, on that day, we had a problem, a big problem, and you're going to see the meltdown.
In this gifted and talented classroom, Eloise is working in a group of 4 to brainstorm words that contain the core word, ring.
A ring holder.
Ring holder?
Yeah.
Oh, like at a wedding?
Yeah.
What else? Ring. Ringling.
That could work.
Y'all are doing very well.
String. It has a ring and a string. Okay, string.
Because Eloise is allowed to do all the writing, the group activity goes smoothly.
She's extremely bright. She has Asperger's syndrome. Very, very social in that she interacts with people a whole lot, but it's not appropriate. She's very bossy with kids.
Okay, let's count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so write 7.
Eloise controls the group's decision-making and turn-taking.
Ring-a-ling. Well, kind of.
Let's think about that.
Okay. String. No. Can we just do ring-a-ling?
Yeah, let's do ring-a-ling. Yeah, ring-a-ling sounds good. Okay.
Okay.
3, 6, 9, 12.
As a group member starts to add up their points, Eloise becomes distressed.
I want to add it up.
When the student directly challenges her behavior, Eloise becomes more agitated and quickly loses control.
You wrote that 9.
You wrote it.
I just wrote over it.
Okay,
You
guys.
wrote the 9.
No,
Guys.
you wrote the 9.
Hold on.
He wrote the 9.
Time out.
No.
Time out. We're going to take a time
You
out.
wrote the 9 already.
Take a time out. Okay. What I want you guys to do.
He wrote the 9 and he said he did. Come here.
That is.
The teacher provides a safety barrier and removes the targeted student before calling the special educator for assistance.
To de-escalate a situation where Eloise is blowing up, she has totally lost control. There's certain steps that seem to work most of the time, probably 90% of the time, is to get her out of the situation, first of all, remove her from that room, remove her to a safe place. It typically has to be a place with no one else.
So you saw Eloise, and again, the gifted and talented teacher did all the right things by calling for somebody. In this case, it was with a pre-planned card with another teacher's name on it. When that teacher or principal or counselor or assistant principal sees that red card with her name on it, that means get down here right now. I need help immediately. And certainly you're going to see the special ed teacher who immediately got there and escorted Eloise out. So the GT teacher had 2 options. If Eloise refused to be escorted out, that might mean evacuating the classroom, clearing out the classroom, and getting her to calm down in there. In this case, she did agree to be escorted out, and that's where they did, in another quiet room, where they finally did the instructional consequences. In the previous video, in previous webcam, we looked at addressing some of the sensory needs, and we also looked at some of the physical structure. And looking at this slide right here, we touched on some of the routines and schedules last time. Today, we're going to look at some more visual strategies, especially instructional consequences. Previously, I had talked about the meltdown cycle and likened it to a volcano, and you see those numbers right there, that 1, 2, 3, all the way up to the 4. You're going to use a lot of prevention strategies on the left-hand side. By the time it gets to that 4, by the time it gets to a full-blown meltdown, just as you saw with Eloise, she's lost all rational thinking. Once it gets there, there is nothing you can do except let it ride its course. Adults who have Asperger's, who can tell us what it's like to be overstimulated, to have that meltdown, and how scary a feeling it is because they lose all rationality or that ability to even know what's going on around them. The time to finally look at instructional consequences, coping strategies, post-vention strategies is right here on the right-hand side of that volcano. The 5 is too early. The 6 is probably still too early. That's stage 6. We must wait until they're probably all the way at a 7. And as I have said previously, it might even be the next day before you finally start some instructional strategies. The 3 areas, that prevention, intervention, postvention, in the previous webcam I did, webinar, I showed several prevention and intervention strategies, and as we discussed then, they were originally instructional strategies. Well, on this one, I'm going to show you some more. We looked at some of the prevention strategies, and as Gary Mezebov had said, 90 to 99% of the behavior problems can be prevented if we use some of these visual strategies. The problem is predicting the problem. All of these that you see up here are prevention strategies, but they were done because there was a problem. You know, things like social scripts, video modeling, you know, calming, sensory area, actually creating some of those areas, the break bank. Those were actually created because there was a particular problem that was occurring. Again, here's some more right here with some more prevention strategies. I had already gone over power cards. I went over social stories. We did surprise cards last time. We did schedules. We looked at physical structure. So let's look at some more with some of the post-vention strategies. Again, these look almost like the same thing you saw, the instructional consequences. These look almost like some of those prevention and intervention strategies. One thing that can only be done as an instructional consequence are the T-charts. You see right up there on the left-hand side. T-charts are a technique that were taught to us by Temple Grandin. Dr. Temple Grandin had her PhD in animal husbandry. She's brilliant, probably knows more about cows and bulls and pigs than anybody else in the world. She also has high-functioning autism. She does not have Asperger's. She has high-functioning autism. And she has come up with the idea of the T-chart. And you're going to see a lot of examples of T-charts because it is a very effective visual strategy that happens after the behavior, the inappropriate behavior, has occurred. You're also going to see, such as on here, some of the instructional consequences, some cartooning, social autopsies, a feelings chart. You know, where are you on that feelings chart? We've gone over quite a bit with power cards, social stories. Another instructional strategy, a consequence, are the socks. And again, that's a post-vention strategy. We are not able to predict what some of our students may do. Also on that right-hand side of the slide, you see some others that we've already gone on. Keychain rules, we've talked about that. We've talked about the walk, don't talk. Transition markers, a calming sensory area, as well as some break bank and cards. The important piece is when that student starts escalating, talk less. Talk less and show your visual strategies more. It might mean you're pointing to them. It might mean you're holding them up. You're alerting them. If you have posters and you've got your levels of talking for the whole class, you might be pointing to that as well. If it's on his desk, if his power card is on the desk, it might be touching the power card. But the bottom line is, by this point, if he's already escalating and he's already at that 2 or 3, that's the time to stop talking and to talk less. And again, one of my favorite, talk low, talk slow, and don't say much. Good old John Wayne. All right, what to do after the meltdown. Let's look at some of these. Consequating behavior. The reason I'm bringing this up, and I try to use these interchangeably, post-vention strategies, instructional consequences. Oftentimes when a teacher says, or even an administrator might say, but how do you consequate that behavior? Many times the thought of consequating the behavior might be sending them home. It might be sending them to a separate room, ISS. It might be, in some places across the United States, it might be corporal punishment. You know, those are the ideas of punishment, removing them and giving them punitive consequences. I'm not talking about punitive consequences. I'm looking at instructional consequences. How can we teach them in the way that they learn? And what we know is that they learn through their visual channel. How can we get it either on paper, through pictures, through a video, that it gets from that short-term memory, working memory, and then finally into that long-term memory, so that if we continue to introduce it consistently, it's finally in that long-term memory. Well, here are some ways right here. One is called the SOCs. This is a form that was actually created by Rusa, J.B. Rusa, for students with emotional disorders. And it was so effective that many educators started using it with our students with Asperger's, with our students who cognitively are either at average or even brilliant levels of intelligence. The form is in the back of your resource as well, so you might want to look at that. And I'm going to go over the SOCs with a scenario. By the way, the acronym is Situation, Options, Consequences, Choices, Strategies, and Simulation. And that's the acronym for SOCs. Here's an example of it. Okay, so sitting down with the student after the meltdown, after the crisis situation, and again, making sure he's at that 7 level, because at a 5 or a 6, he's not listening at all. But sitting down with him and not just talking to him. And yes, you can talk with him, but not just talking, but writing down what exactly happened. Well, here's the situation. What happened exactly? What's the situation? Well, he's looking at me. Well, who's looking at you? Matt. Matt was looking at me. Well, what was he doing? He was making fun of me. When? During science class. Well, why? Well, he didn't like me. He thinks I'm stupid. And you as the educator, whether you're the principal, the counselor, the speech therapist, the regular ed teacher, you're sitting down and you're writing these things as he's saying this. Okay, what are some of our options? And you actually write down what he tells you. And some of those options may be really, really far out. You know, in fact, if anything, for instance, looking at some of those options right there at the left-hand side, I was writing down ignoring him, you know, telling him hello, what's up, you know. He actually called him a very derogatory name, thinking that it's going to make him stop. So I wrote that down. All right, so writing those down, what do you think is going to happen if you ignore him? And hear him respond, well, he might stop. Well, what about if you tell him hello? What do you think may happen? Well, I might make a friend. You know, some of these things you're talking with the student, but he may be responding in a way that is so off the wall that you have to come up with some ideas of some of those consequences. For instance, this next one, calling him a name. Okay, you know, you call him a name. What do you think might happen? And the young man that I was working with said, he'll stop. And I go, the other option might be he punches you in the nose. He hits you. You know, it escalates the situation. Those are the kinds of times when, as the educator or the counselor, you're there talking with him and you're helping him to see, and again, notice the way I'm saying seeing, you may actually be doing some cartooning as well. You're drawing it out on what may occur. In this case, he chose that he wants to do the what's up. And you see that's where we put the little check mark or the X right there. Right there on the simulation type, there's so many different ways of doing that. There can be a role play. You can actually videotape what it might look like. Those of you who do video modeling, this is an ideal time to tie in video modeling with the SOX form. And we won't talk a lot about video modeling today because that's nearly a workshop in itself, but a very effective technique. This is another technique, cartooning. Cartooning is, as I said earlier, as you're going through the SOX form, you may actually be cartooning some of the things that occurred. It can be used as a standalone technique or again with another technique such as the T-chart or even the SOX program. In this case, this was a cartooning because Derek loves video with the computers. And so knowing that that was his reinforcer and how hard it was to get through the day, you're going to see where the educator drew out some things. You know, you're going to get your work done that's off the shelf, then we're going to have our lunch, we're going to come back for resource, then that's when you get your computer. And then she even drew out some other things. Now, in this case, it was the educator who was doing the cartooning. In the video that you see with the instructional consequences with Eloise, she's doing her own cartooning. And with her cartooning, she's explaining what went on in the classroom. Again, a very, very effective technique, especially for our students who have anywhere from average to brilliant levels of intelligence. It's a way of reaching that cognitive level. Bottom line, and I think many of you already know this, just talking to them is not going to work. Sometimes educators or counselors will say, well, we talked about that yesterday, and he was able to tell me exactly what he was supposed to do. But it really didn't get into his long-term memory. He may have been able to repeat what you just said, but it really wasn't in their long-term memory. You want them to be able to see it down on paper. And that's why you always try to pair your verbal with the visual as much as possible. Another one is the feelings chart. And we did show this last time, but this is one that again might be introduced as an instructional consequence. You'll notice on the right-hand side that we have filled in some areas. If you're at a 5, how can you get to a 4? How can we move this paper clip right here to 5 to the 4? If you're at a 4, how can we get to a 3? Some of the things that you may put on the right-hand side might be bizarre, you know, because he's the one coming up with how can I finally get to a 4 or a 3 or a 2. Several days ago, there was a situation with a young man who was lining up, who got into a fist fight while lining up. And this is a young man who had a lot of sensory issues, so we did do a feelings chart, something similar to this, and it did have some of his favorite characters on it, not just the happy faces and sad faces, but some of his favorite characters. One thing that I was intrigued with is that he kept talking about his soccer moves, that he can get from a 5 to a 4 if he can do his soccer moves. And I'm asking, what are your soccer moves? And he went through all these gyrations of kicking his legs, etc. Which, you know, it looks like he's being physical, but if he has a chance to get some of that large motor movement out, to finally reduce that from a 5 to a 4, hey, if there's an appropriate place he can do it, just as long as he doesn't hurt somebody. Some of the kids have talked about deep pressure. Oftentimes when they're already at a 5, it's just as we said earlier, he's on sensory overload. He is at that point where he's not hearing a word you're saying. So we've got to give him some tools to calm down from a 5 to a 4 to a 3, and then finally against to a 2 and a 1. Here's another one. This is a commercial one. You can see the little disc at the bottom. For him, it's every single day coming in, and where are you right now on your emotion thermometer? And he is marking where he is. And it may even going back to something you just saw on the previous slide. Well, okay, you're at a 5. How can we get to a 4? Or you came in with a 2. How can we finally get to a 1? One technique that I observed in a classroom that I'm going to share with you was from this wonderful, wonderful teacher. And as the students entered the classroom, there were 5 different bottles of lotion on their desk, on his desk. And each of the lotions were in different color containers. Each of the lotions had different pictures of emotions. You know, one might have been very happy, another one was very angry, there was one that was distraught, one was like excited, but it had all these different pictures. And as students would file into this teacher's classroom, the teacher would say, go to my desk and just kind of pump out the lotion, how you're feeling today. And I thought that was so clever because it gave that teacher some indication of all of his students, how they felt that day. Not just that student who was having problems with his emotions, that student with Asperger's, but every one of his students in that classroom. The other thing that I admired about this teacher is that throughout the day, he encouraged the students to go pump out some more lotion if those feelings have changed since the morning. So if that was a student who came in that morning feeling tired and now he was feeling energetic, or that was a student who was feeling happy when he came in and now he's distraught. Those were the kinds of things that I thought was so clever. But what was so remarkable about this was there was a young man in the class who did have difficulty, and I'll call him Wesley. Wesley had difficulty identifying his emotions. He could identify if he was happy, he could identify if he was angry, but that was it. All those in-between emotions he was not able to identify. Probably one thing that the teacher didn't realize, the gift that he was giving Wesley, was the visuals. You know, having the visual as well as the tactile, because for Wesley, going and identifying his emotions according to the color as well as according to the picture on each one. Wesley is now in college, and I love to tell this story because Wesley still talks about, you know, that green emotion that you sometimes get or that blue emotion you sometimes get. And I look back on those junior high years for Wesley thinking that's how he was taught those emotions, were through those visual strategies. And I thought what a powerful, powerful gift this teacher gave to Wesley through the years. So I'm going to say hello to you out there to Mr. Weinhauser, who did an awesome job of helping that. I'm going to introduce the T-chart. I mentioned earlier about T-charts, and as you're going to notice, this is ugly. I mean, it's filled out. You're going to see on one side, you know, things that are inappropriate, and then over here, the appropriate things that must be said. It's a running T-chart. You're going to notice that it might be filled out, and it's maybe in his social skills notebook. It may be a place in his desk. The teacher may keep this. But it's a running T-chart. So you can see everything is written down on the inappropriate and what would have been the appropriate thing. I've seen it done so many different ways. Here's another one. An adult with Asperger's. The mother was telling me the story about how she and her daughter with Asperger's, who is 25 years old, they were going to a casserole. They were going to a luncheon, and they had forgotten to bring the casserole. So as they got to the hostess's house, and the hostess answers the door, the mother then apologizes profusely for not bringing the casserole. And she offers some money for the main meal, the meat. And the hostess very graciously said, "Susie, don't worry about it. You know, we've got plenty of food. You and your daughter Jamie just come on in and enjoy. We've got plenty of food." Again, Susie, the mother, says, "I really would feel so much better if you would let me give you some money towards the main menu." And again, the hostess says, don't worry about it. There are so many times I've forgotten to bring the casserole to your house as well. Susie's daughter, Jamie, says, she's right, Mom. She always forgets to bring the casserole. And my friend was saying, I was just so embarrassed. I wanted to go underneath the desk. And she said, luckily the hostess laughed about it and said, see, she even recognizes I forget to bring the casserole as well. In my mind, I was thinking, Jamie needs a T-chart. She needs a T-chart. Just like Temple Grandin, who has taught us how to do these T-charts. And her T-chart might look like this. On one side, it might be honesty. You know, she always forgets to bring the casserole to our house. And on the other side, it might be diplomacy. You know, and again, you know, it's you either say nothing. You know, again, it's a way of conveying in visual terms what that might look like. This is one that was done because he was really into Transformers. So I'm going to share with you, this is a social story with the Transformers. And you can see that we had the Transformer that is the happy Transformer, and I think that is Bobot or whatever for those of you who love Transporter. He's the good guy. He's the good Transformer. When I say nice things, when I follow directions, when I work on my assignments. Again, this is highly visual and highly individualized. You know, ways to an unhappy Transformer. Okay, here's the bad Transformer. Ways to an unhappy, oh no, hitting myself or someone else, threatening someone. You know, instead, I'll use my relaxation thermometer. I'll use my break cards. He had several break cards. All of this is in his social stories, and this is his T-chart. He's got on the right-hand side the bad Transformer who does inappropriate things, and then on the left-hand side, the Transformer that does appropriate things. Again, it doesn't have to be beautiful, but this was just introducing some strategies to this young man through a social story and incorporating some of the tools that he can use. Bumblebee would be so proud of me. Hey, Bumblebee. How did I do today? Okay, so that was his social story. Here he is. I can do this. Here are some of the strategies you just saw in that social story, the break cards. I needed one to take 2 times around the building, 1 time around the building. I need 5 minutes. I need 7 minutes, just appropriately giving us, the adults, some kind of a cue that I've got to get out of here. Here's his T-chart, my T-chart to help me learn. And here's his relaxation thermometer. In the next video clip, you're going to see a pretty T-chart. T-charts are not meant to be pretty. In this video, you're going to see the T-chart that the teacher had typed out because it's for the video. But just remember that T-charts aren't usually pretty. It's done as an instructional consequence, sitting down with the student once he's calmed down and writing out exactly what was the inappropriate, and then what would be the appropriate thing to do. Here we go.
So what should we do instead?
Use nose and
What's he using right there? What is that?
tissue.
It's a tissue, and that's appropriate. That's good.
T-charts give students options of what to do instead of inappropriate behavior.
Inappropriate? This is interrupt.
Interrupt.
That means you talk when a teacher's talking or another kid's talking. Interrupt. Instead of interrupting, appropriate is
Raise your hand.
raise your hand, and then you talk. You were really good at raising your hand yesterday in class. You did a great job in this one. That was perfect.
Reviewing his T-chart each morning helps prepare Nathan for a successful day in the regular classroom.
I'm ready to work.
I'm ready to work, like you are right now, right?
I think for us here at our school, we have an amazing gift, and it's the ability to work together in the same classroom, and that's not something that is necessarily viable in every school, but if you have 2 people who are committed, whether it's a teacher and a paraprofessional or a teacher and a parent who are on the same page, and they know what's happening with that student, with their schedule, with their T-chart, with their power card, that it doesn't matter who does it, as long as that person has a relationship with the kid.
First of all, giving hints, okay? Help find answers, okay? We want you to be a good helper.
In addition to reading his social story, Ian reviews a T-chart before going to his first grade tutoring job.
What is not a good job, would not be right, is do the writing for the student, because we want them to learn to write. Doing all their work, okay? Giving them the answers.
Jam, map.
Good job. You're on a roll.
The very specific do's and don'ts of Ian's T-chart help him regulate his interactions with the first grade students.
Is saw.
Because he is able to function effectively in the tutoring role, Ian's own achievement and behavior have improved dramatically.
Me. And
Good job.
Ian's social story and T-chart rules work together to effectively guide and direct his behavior as a tutor.
The first grade teachers welcome it when Ian walks into that classroom because he really is another person in there to help with those students. You saw another way of using the T-chart with a job, not a job, and I thought this was so clever because Ian was a young man who was demonstrating a lot of behavior problems in that 5th grade classroom. And there was an administrator on the campus who really was great at thinking outside the box. And she suggested that Ian go to the 1st grade class to help with the reading. His reading level was a bit low, and she thought this might help with his behavior as well as with his reading. The 5th grade teachers were just like, no way, he's going to hurt those 1st graders, and something's going to happen. Well, it became such a reinforcer for him, such a motivator for him to finish his work so that he could go on to the 1st grade. And that was his job. He practiced those words. He put them on PowerPoint. He memorized those words. He came up with all these different activities for the 1st grade students. So much so that oftentimes he was doing things for the students. And this is why you see that kind of a T-chart where this is your job. This is not your job. Your job is not to massage their shoulders. Your job is not to write the answers down. Here is your job. What I said at the very end of the video, that the 1st grade teachers welcomed Ian coming in. Ian became such a part of their classroom that he asked for the lesson plans from those 1st grade teachers, and the 1st grade teachers thought, sure, he's part of us. But just to show you how significantly changed his behavior was because of using some of those strategies from the administrator as well as that T-chart. I'm also going to share with you the anxiety scale before we finally move on to one more technique, and then finally Eloise and some of the instructional consequences for Eloise. Here's the anxiety scale, which may also be similar to that feelings chart.
Students on the autism spectrum need to learn how to self-monitor their anxiety level.
It helps for them to identify what is going on inside their bodies, to identify their stress level, whether they are feeling calm, mellow, or all the way to that frustration level.
Let's go ahead and do a check-in for where you are today on your chart. So if you're number 1, that tells us what?
I am relaxed. I'm not worried or too upset about anything. I know what's going to happen today and I am prepared.
The anxiety scale enables Eloise to monitor her changing emotions throughout the day.
And I want you to think back with me. When you came in this morning, this is where you thought you were. But as we watched and heard your tone of voice and how it acted, we found out you were really more about a 3, weren't you? It was kind of an irritating start to the day. It was a rough start, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you had a choice, we talked about it, of getting more upset or being able to calm down. So what I've kind of seen happen today is
using the anxiety scale on a consistent basis with high-functioning students helps increase self-awareness and personal control.
Do days happen like that sometimes?
No.
They do.
Not most of the time.
Not for you most of the time, right? It's not usually that much of a swing. But what you've shown is that just because you come in a 3 doesn't mean all day has to be a 3.
Helping students on the autism spectrum recognize their emotions is an ongoing process. Students with Asperger's syndrome and high-functioning autism respond positively to prevention and intervention strategies that directly address individual needs. To achieve maximum benefits, teachers need to have several strategies in place for each student.
The variety of strategies is very, very helpful for the success of our students with autism and for the success of the teacher and to preserve her lesson or his lesson. For the most part, it's preventative. Now, nothing works 100% of the time, but for most of the time, the strategies help to de-escalate, to prevent situations, to just provide a successful environment for our students, for them to learn, for all students to learn.
Okay. One more strategy, and then let's go ahead and see the end of the video of Eloise, because as you've noticed, Eloise has a lot of strategies in place in her second grade classroom. You saw the emotions, you saw keychain rules, she's got putty, the TheraPutty, she has a wiggle cushion, she has her schedules, her mini schedules, power cards, she has many visual strategies in place. Another strategy that might interest you as an instructional consequence, and again, this is an instructional consequence, is something called a social autopsy. It's similar to the SOCs, but it's a little bit different format. It's writing out, identify what happened, identify the persons who were hurt by the error, describe how you can rectify that error, what you can do about it, and then develop a technique, develop a strategy that does not cause the error. So it's one more way of, again, using a visual instead of just all the talking about what happened, actually writing it down, sitting next to that student. You're now going to see Eloise. You're going to see the special ed teacher, Wendy, who is escorting Eloise out. Then you're going to see some of the instructional strategies, some of the instructional consequences when Eloise is finally calmed down. I do agree with most everything that this teacher is doing. The first thing, though, is in this day and time, holding a child in your lap might be a dangerous thing to do. And again, depending on the district, depending on the age level. I certainly understand what she's trying to do. What she's trying to do is calm her down, give her that deep pressure. But as she says later, that deep pressure could also be provided through weighted vests, maybe even the deep pressure on the shoulders. So I would caution a teacher about holding a child, especially a second grader, in your lap. The rest of the things that you're going to see in the video are right on target. You're going to see cartooning. You're also going to be looking, as she brings up some of the things that they have been using as prevention strategies. And then you're also going to see her re-enter the classroom. So hopefully, given what you've seen today and maybe even in the past, you've come up with some of your own instructional strategies. So here we go to see what happens with Eloise.
To de-escalate a situation where Eloise is blowing up, she has totally lost control. There's certain steps that seem to work most of the time, probably 90% of the time, is to get her out of the situation. First of all, remove her from that room, remove her to a safe place. It typically has to be a place with no one else. Which way you want to go? Ooh, this way. We come in, we immediately get the sensory stuff in place. And all that may look like her vest. That's what we use today. We put the vest on. She wanted the putty. She typically wants the putty and all, and she plays with that and stretches that and works with that. Occasionally we use a rocking chair and we just rock quietly for a couple of minutes, and you can see her immediately start to calm.
Some students on the autism spectrum find repetitive motion calming.
Give her a few minutes to start to let that sensory work, and then step in, and we're using the comic strip stories, where she can sketch it and make it visual and have something in front of her to help guide her through the situation. Eloise, I'd like a little information about what happened out in the GT class that got you upset. Would you do a cartoon with me?
Okay.
Let's do a comic. How many squares do we need today?
6.
6 squares. Do you want to set it up? We start with how many boxes do you need, because she sets up the precursors. This is her way to go back to her interpretation of what happened first that set up the situation. Do you want to draw first and then talk, or do you want to kind of talk while you're drawing?
Talk while I'm drawing.
Good. Okay.
Well, there were 4 kids at one table, and I was one of those 4 kids.
Okay.
I'll just draw some chairs, or I'm a good chair drawer. And like in this chair was Braden, this chair was Dylan, this chair was Olivia, and this chair was me.
She takes a lot of control of a comic strip to draw it and to sit down and sketch through the incidences.
And on this one, like, Braden gets the paper and he gets to write one thing.
Okay.
So Braden is drawing a 9. So we drew that 9. And
Can you put that up here so I can see? Okay.
And he was drawing a 9 on the paper. And it looked kind of like a G, like this.
Gotcha.
He made it look like that. And I looked at it and then drew it over with a real 9.
So you corrected his work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It was actually our work.
It was teamwork?
Yes.
Okay.
And it looked kind of like a G, so I drew over it, make it look more like a 9.
Right.
And then I was about to hand the paper. We were about to hand the paper over to Olivia.
The teacher interjects to ensure that each student's role is represented.
And then Braden's like, "Okay, I'm going to draw the 12 now." He already drew the 9.
Let's put him with the speech bubble then.
And then I'm like, "But you already drew the 9.
Okay. Tell me about tone of voice here. How did you say that?
But you already drew the 9.
Was it that calm of a voice, or do you think maybe it was a
like
little more
that.
escalated?
It was like that.
Okay.
Really. I'm like, but you already drew the 9.
Okay. So my job is to try to fill in those thought processes, the inferences that are going on from the other kids. Oh, so he thought of that differently, didn't he? When he saw you draw over it again, he interpreted it, or he thought that counted as your turn, I bet. Do you think he was thinking that?
But I had already had a turn.
Okay. But his thinking, can I give a think bubble? Sounds like Braden was thinking this. When sometimes she can see where it broke down, but it typically has broken down before that. And there's something she missed communication-wise from the other kids that they either said or was implied, and she didn't catch it because she was already starting to shut down. It's almost like her ears start funneling in. It's like a tunnel vision, but it's with her ears. She only hears certain things, and she doesn't hear the whole situation that goes on.
I was reaching my body over the table.
To do what?
To get Braden.
When Eloise becomes aggressive, she calls it a bubble pop.
What do you mean by I'm going to go get him? What do you mean by that?
Like being really mean to him.
Like what? I need specifics.
Bubble pop.
Yeah. You were going to bubble pop?
The next step is to give Eloise a strategy for avoiding confrontation.
Your job is right here to stop the situation. How can you stop it at this point so it doesn't get to that 5 where you're losing control and you're going to bubble pop? Before she has to step in, how can you stop the situation?
The teacher helps her see how to apply a strategy they have been practicing.
What have we been practicing? We did it in the den this morning. We practiced it.
Right,
it just
walking
happened.
away.
Yeah. With a kid, this works really well. If you had walked away, look and listen, maybe just let them go ahead and finish that paper. Get it done so it doesn't bother. Then when they switch to something new, if you had walked right back in and just jumped in with the new thing, what do you think would happen?
It would work.
The final step is to focus on a positive return to the classroom.
When you get back in, they're going to have switched on to a new topic, aren't they?
Yes.
So what does that mean for you?
it's good.
It's good, isn't it? It's good. All right. Are you ready to try this strategy if something like that happens again?
Yes.
To walk away and come back in? Good job on the cartoon.
While walking back to the classroom, the teacher continues to prepare Eloise for a successful re-entry.
Who are the people you feel safest around that would be a good person to go play with if they're doing indoor recess? Catherine?
Olivia, Catherine, and Cassidy.
That's who I want you to make eye contact with. That's who I want your eyes to look for first. Okay? I want them to look for the people you feel safest with and most comfortable with. Okay? And to walk straight towards those people to join them.
You've probably picked up from that there was some talking, but most importantly, it was writing everything down. That's what cartooning may be, that may be what the instructional consequences may be. Some of you are thinking, I would have used a T-chart, I might have used socks, I might have used a power card. Any of those strategies are okay. Every one of those are viable strategies. The important piece is, again, don't sweep it under the mud, under the rug, and to make sure that there is something in place to be used as a prevention strategy. I'm going to end it with some quotes from my own husband. My husband has been an administrator, a teacher of students of emotional disturbances for many, many years. He loves his Harley-Davidson motorcycle, so I'm going to introduce you to him when he says right here, law number 1, I'm an educator. If I can't teach them in the way they learn, then I haven't taught them anything. Law number 2, I'm an educator. I'm not a policeman. Law number 3, in the grand scheme of eternity, my job is to make them productive citizens. I hope you think the same way, and thank you for joining us for this. And I hope you can use these strategies as well. Let me know. Thanks. Bye-bye.